Le résultat du vote est le suivant. 72 voix pour, 35 voix contre, 32 abstentions. Le projet de résolution est adopté.
The United States rises to declare before the General Assembly of the United Nations and before the world that it does not acknowledge, it will not abide by, it will never acquiesce in this infamous act.
In a very real sense, this is also the new year for the United Nations too. In the spirit of Tashlich, I hope we can cast away the distrust and disagreement of the past year. And as we look ahead, I encourage Member States and all our partners to work together for the common good and a better world for all. Thank you very much.
It's a delight to have you all registered here today from many continents of the world. And I think we had, last we saw, we were some 150 participants. So this is a great crowd with us today, as we will have this conversation with Gregory Lafitte. Gregory. And we've said that this is not an interview. It's not a Zoom meeting like we had a few weeks ago, but this is simply a conversation where we will sit and talk and reflect on the current situation. As we have said, given the theme, the great pause, what have we learned and where do we go from here? Just to share a little bit about our reflections over these last few months when everything, what used to be normal, suddenly came to a close. And we have had to adapt to a completely new situation. But this has also given us an opportunity to reflect over the last 17 years of the work of the European Coalition for Israel. And this is what, the journey that we would like to take you on today, looking at the history, to reflect on where we are today, but also to look into the future. But Gregory, if I start on a rather dramatic note, we were supposed to be in New York together in late February. I couldn't make it, you were there. Then you came home and you said you didn't feel well, and what happened?
Well, a number of things happened, but it didn't happen really very quickly. I think 2 weeks after I came back from New York, I wasn't feeling too well. I thought, what is this virus that everyone is talking about? It's not much more than just a bad flu. And then I was really struck by something, and it turned out to be that virus. So yes, I was in bedridden for 3 weeks and even a bit more, it was tough. But I thought, as I told you before, I thought it was not only like this virus; it was a bit of a virus of a certain fear. I've heard some say this was the first world fear. there's like the World War I, and was the first world fear. I mean, there's certainly a number of things that we could say on this, but so where were you when it all started?
Well, it's the same question as we keep asking ourselves. Where were you when JFK was killed? We're not quite that generation. Others are saying, well, where were you on September 11, 2001? But certainly, as as we move forward from here, this will be the question that people will ask themselves: where was I when I realized what was really happening? I was all packed and ready to go to Tallinn, Estonia, of all places, to have a meeting with the foreign minister. And I was just to go out from the door when I received an email to say that the foreign ministry in Tallinn was closed for foreigners. And it didn't make sense that I would travel over to Estonia. So obviously I had to cancel that trip. Shortly after, I realized I had a trip planned to Brussels the following week. I had to cancel that trip. I had another one to London. And all of a sudden I realized, this is for real. And, it's been 3 months now, and there hasn't been one single, working mission anywhere. And looking forward, even the next few months, I don't really have anything planned. So this is major.
Yeah. Well, when I look at those past months and how we only had some shops open, the necessary goods. I think personally there were some things missing, like Peggy used to say that the necessary goods, there's bread and books, but books, it was a bit hard to to get some. So what do you think of this whole period? I mean, concerning our subject, what's your thinking on this period?
Yeah, obviously it's profound, both on a personal level, both when it relates to society as a whole, but also here we're discussing perhaps the ramifications for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel, for the work of ECI. Obviously, we are not the World Health Organization, so we can't.
Good for us, yeah.
Good for us. We can't evaluate or assess how it was dealt with. But what I wanted to say, and it's not only a personal reflection, but also I think for the work of ECI, it has given us this opportunity to pause, which I think is a good opportunity. So I think personally for me, and perhaps even for ECI, it has been a good 3 months, as strange as that sounds. And I know among the questions that has been sent in to us, some have asked, well, wasn't this a great disappointment because you couldn't go to San Remo, for example? But I think it has learned us the gift of adapting. Things doesn't always go according to plan. And even in situations like we are in now, I think that we made some strategic choices to live broadcast an event from Jerusalem on San Remo. The fact that we couldn't meet in a normal way by inviting world leaders to San Remo opened up a unique opportunity for us to send them personal letters to ask for a response. And this way, just focusing on the San Remo resolution, forcing them to read a summary about the San Remo resolution and come to a conclusion to say, well, how are we going to react to this? Under normal circumstances, the impact would not have been as profound as it was for us. Well, say thanks to the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I thought there were some. I mean, you said we're not the World Health Organization, and it's a good thing. And perhaps you were saying this a little bit, saying that we're not the experts, so we don't have anything to say about the virus. But I think perhaps we've heard a little bit more, a bit too much from the experts in this crisis, and it makes me think a little bit of some old questions of always trying to find an explanation for everything. I think we'll come back to that, I think, a bit later, because it's I think this pandemic has some consequences, but there is always this tendency of trying to find, always have an explanation for everything. It's this everything has a reason. Nil est, what is it? Sine ratione. There's always there's a reason for everything, and I think it's a little bit the Greeks would call it the hubris, the démesure in French we say, and I'm not so sure in English actually, the excess of explanation. We have to find an explanation for everything, and as we know, when we start going in that direction, it's not always great for the Jews. I mean, the conclusions we come to are not always the best ones.
I was going to say that you can always blame it on the Jews.
Yeah, I mean that's
we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah. So do you want to say more things about this this period, or shall we?
No, I think for me it's like point of reference, looking back, evaluating where we are, looking into the future. So I think what is more essential perhaps in this discussion is to try to look at the background, the history of ECI. Mm-hmm. This is something that we hopefully will, we are recording it, but we may put it on the website so people can go for reference to this program and listen. So, yeah.
But there is some similarity actually, of what I understand. I mean, I wasn't there. I've only been with ECI for the past 10 years, but it feels like more than 10 years to me actually. But I understand it also started with a crisis. I mean, 17 years ago. So could you tell us, remind us perhaps for some of us who already know, but.
Yeah, you can say it started because of this deadly virus, and a virus that, the promising thing with COVID-19 is that everyone expects a vaccine to come out, maybe in the next few months, certainly within a year. Mm-hmm. But there is another deadly virus that has caused the death of, some people evaluate 12 million Jews. Anti-Semitism, mm-hmm. which, hasn't been the same efforts made from the international community to say, listen, we have a terrible problem, we have to find a solution. This has been around for, thousands of years, actually going back to the book of Esther, as we mentioned, so many times. But we're still struggling with the consequences. Yeah. Yeah. So it is true that ECI was born out of a crisis that is not going over anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And this is really the raison d'être for everything we do. We live with this deadly virus among us. The writing on the wall is not very positive as where we are today. So this is for us a time not only to pause and reflect, but to really prepare for the next season.
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned Esther. I always find it quite incredible that the book of Esther is really the where there's everything about anti-Semitism. There's almost the definition, of anti-Semitism. I know I've said that before, but it always troubles me a little bit that that when the first place really in the Bible where it's written so clearly what anti-Semitism is, talking about these people different from all other peoples, having other customs. It describes Mordechai as a Judean, as a Jew, Yehudi, but he's actually from the tribe of Benjamin. So so it's almost the Lord telling us, okay, that's what anti-Semitism is. It's what is described there in that book, and I think it's always important that we continue to go back to those roots of how ECI started concerning Purim.
Yeah, I've been in in many panel discussions where you always come back to this same question: where does anti-Semitism come from? And as you said earlier, in modern society, we always want to have a clear, defined answer. So there would be a number of replies to that questions, and people would study, the rise of National Socialism. Others would focus on political Islam. But I would always raise this question, and well, a third category would say, well, this is a Christian invention. But I would always go back to the Book of Esther and said, well, isn't this interesting? We're talking about, you know this better than me. How many years ago is that? 2000 something, 2,300 years.
I'm afraid I'm going to say something.
Well, we can check that later. But still, the obsession to exterminate a whole people group is there. Mm-hmm. So I think this is something that is beyond just a human-made ideology. It's someone would say it's more than that. It's demonic in a way that cannot be grasped by human mind. But you mentioned something very interesting. We spoke about the Book of Esther the other week, and you had discovered something just before the Second World War, which I think is very relevant to this discussion.
Yes, well, it's something that I find really troubling. I don't know why I never thought about it. I'm sure many people have seen it before, but well, first of all, there's this very interesting thing in the story of Esther, where when you try to understand how does everything turn around, because that's the beauty of the story of Esther, is that there's this anti-Semitic decree, and the Lord, who is never mentioned in the book, in the scroll, everything turns everything around. And so I try to understand, because since what we're working on is this, I mean, you said it yourself, from the beginning of ECI, to try to see what we can do to fight anti-Semitism, to this rise of anti-Semitism. And I believe somehow one of the pivotal moments is, and certainly I think the pivotal moment, is the moment when the king says, what have we done for Mordechai, who has who has done this thing of warning of this plot that was against the king. And so he said, but what recognition have we given to Mordechai? And I think there's something which I don't want to read too much into it, but still, I think it somehow illustrates what we're trying to do. And we're not going to talk, I think, today about our work at the UN, but somehow it illustrates very well this. But I think the thing you were mentioning, sorry, I'm being a bit too long, but is this the surprising thing that many of the Jewish people, of the Jewish communities in Europe, before the Second World War, I realized just recently that they were hoping that the story of Purim would happen again. They were hoping that it would, the situation would be overturned. And I discovered that because there's this French writer who is really not well known. His name is Armand Lunel, and he wrote a piece where it's a theater piece where it's about Esther, the book of Esther, but in Carpentras, this place in France where there's been Jews before Jesus. In France, and if you go there, you visit the cemetery, and at the same time, it's one of the places where we've seen a lot of anti-Semitism. So they were hoping that through this piece, which was there was a representation just a few years before the war. So just when they learned that there would be those anti-Semitic measures, they produced this piece I believe, and I read, some texts hoping that the same story would happen. And even during the war, the war, there were some representations of the piece of Jean Racine. Mm-hmm. So it's quite amazing how, I mean, it's not amazing is not the right word. It's troubling. I think it's really troubling, thinking that they were having those representations, hoping that everything would turn around. Mm. And it didn't, as we know.
Yeah, maybe it brings us also back to the early days of European Coalition for Israel. As we said before, interestingly, when we had the founding meeting, someone said, well, wait a minute, what day is it today? And we realized it was the day of Purim. And of course, the significance would follow us throughout the years. But also, the other side of the story is Esther, who is pleading her case before the king. And of course, that's a good example of political advocacy at its best, also with the finesse that she did it.
Yeah.
So when we started this organization in 2003, someone, and it wasn't me, but someone made this statement to say, well, listen, we have the rise of anti-Semitism again, but what is different now is that there is a network of people mm-hmm. who are committed to fighting this deadly virus, a network of people throughout Europe. And it's not, the usual approach that this is up to the Jewish communities, but these are people primarily who are Christians or who are not from the Jewish community, but they believe that this is absolutely essential. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is something which always, it's so important to have this discussion, because it brings us back to the early days, to the roots, to the foundation. Why are we doing it? What is the objective? And looking back, as I've had many opportunities to do these last three months, to see that 17 years on, we are actually, as we would say in our circles, by God's grace, in a place where we can address world leaders. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be learned from the lesson of the Book of Esther, both in terms of how deadly this virus is and how it keeps appearing time and time again. But I think on a more positive side, to say that, well, what was lacking in 1938 in Evian, what was lacking before the war, was a concentrated effort of people that of free will would, stand before government leaders and plead their case.
Yes. It's interesting the way you're presenting Esther like a diplomacy example. As you know, I always like to present Moses. What the Lord teaches Moses to do. They're telling him to go see Pharaoh and asking him just for 3 days in the desert, and he's not asking them, just to leave. But what would you say is the different way of doing things, of what makes ECI a bit different, or what is ECI's, how would you define ECI's way of trying to influence world leaders and trying to do this work that you just talked about?
You just did, or because when you look at the life of Esther, you look at the life of Moses, you can mention other examples, say Daniel. They were not the loudest voices out there. You see Esther, she was really looking for the right opportunity to even speak and to know even what the etiquette was. How do you approach the king? Mm-hmm. Because, if you do it the wrong way, you have your head cut off. Yeah. And with Moses, of course, he was very strategic, he was very diplomatic, and he wasn't unreasonable. Mm-hmm. And I would hope, and I said this earlier today in a conversation with Katarina, we had a lunch, and I said, once you discover your DNA as a person, as an organization, and you walk in this, there can be nothing more meaningful in life. So we I'm sure there are many that considers ECI, well, we're a little bit too soft, or we're not shouting loud enough, and this and that. But I think the examples that we have are very inspiring for us. That it's not at the end of the day how, not even the numbers, and when you look at the significance of one person, be it Moses or Esther, it doesn't take many. But if we do it in the right way, we can really make a difference. So I think for ECI that we have a special DNA. For me, the bottom line is this: are we being heard, recognized, considered? You can be 100% right, but if you communicate in the wrong way, it doesn't have any effect at all. So to be engaged with these leaders and be able to present our point of views, that in itself is a great victory.
Yeah. So let's make sure we don't run out of time. We've been looking at the past, the present. What about the future? How do you see this whole situation right now with the COVID-19? We mentioned a little bit some things already, but how do you see it affecting ECI's work and also the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and what can we do, and how do you see the future?
Yes, of course. I think what we have learned throughout the years, because there are lots of studies, scientific studies about the rise of anti-Semitism, and what are the circumstances which are especially fertile for the spread of anti-Semitism. And what we see in time and time again is crisis situations, being economic depression, be it social instability, but also be it a pandemic. Many have drawn lessons from the Black Death in the Middle Ages, that these are times that spells trouble for the Jewish people in particular. It's like we haven't learned anything in 2,000 years. So you don't have to be a great prophet to say that what we can expect, and we all already seen signs of this African-American person, Michael Floyd, or who was killed in
George Floyd, you mean?
George Floyd, sorry, in Minneapolis, and he's already now being linked with the Palestinian cause, and the accusations that are being made, even by Amnesty International, to say that this is the way of IDF. This is the police have learned this from the Israelis, and making a direct link to the death of Mr. Floyd as a Palestinian martyr. So, and not to mention the spread of COVID-19, how this clearly must be an invention by the Israelis. And the proof of the pudding is to say that, well, they seem to be very quick at finding a vaccine, which clearly indicates that they're the cause of it. So we now have a health crisis, soon to be followed by an economic crisis, possibly, and I don't want to be a doomsayer, but possibly one of the worst after the Second World War, and then obviously leading to a political and social crisis. So during these type of circumstances, and I pray to God that I'm wrong in what I say, but at least we have to be vigilant and see that this would spell trouble, especially for the Jewish people, but also for the state of Israel.
Yeah, what you just said, you hope you're wrong. It makes me think of Jonah, but I want to enter into that. But yes, when I see what's going on right now with, I hear many people saying that it's almost nature taking back its rights, and I find it a bit dangerous, I must say, because it's almost saying that the world is better without humans. There's a there's this little bit this this thought this whole thing of we've been all in a lockdown. We reduced our own world to ourselves. We've been just locked down. I hear this idea of rediscovering one's truth, things like this. I think that it's really a time also where we need to say what is the real message. What does the Jewish culture, the Jewish revelation teaches us. It's I think it's more to go towards others, to reach out to others, than to just stay on oneself, and and as you've said already, I think the danger of the current situation is that we're always going to try to find who's responsible. And so this is what is happening with this terrible situation, crisis in the US right now, is that we want to see who is responsible for this. And that's why I don't understand how Amnesty International can come up with such an article blaming Israel on this. It looks like it's as absurd to say such a thing today. But yes, we're heading in that direction again, unfortunately. And I think when we see situations today, it looks like every time we have a crisis, we'll always end up with some kind of anti-Semitism, some form. I was just I just realized earlier today, looking back at this piece of Racine that I just mentioned. Even Racine in the 17th century, he talks about anti-Semitism, and it says that it can take a number of forms. Even Racine in the 17th century. So what else do you see for the future of ECI?
Well, if we look internally, perhaps for a few moments, and I mean, what we're doing already now is in some way a consequence of the lockdown. And I think, again, generally speaking, this is redefining how we are doing things, how we're conducting business, how we are even conveying our voice. So for ECI internally, I think this has been a time where we've been able to paradoxically connect much more with our constituency than ever before. All of a sudden, we discovered this great discovery, Zoom. Of course, it's been out there, all these years, but we always insisted on, traveling and flying in order to be together.
Able to do it one day again, but yeah.
I hope so. But as an introvert Finn, we don't mind, this lockdown and staying behind our screens, jokingly. But I think it has learned us to adapt and just find new ways of reaching out. And as I said earlier, even with Sanremo, it was not a catastrophe at all. The contrary. There are other ways of getting the message across. Just to say a few words about the webinar. What we saw with the live broadcast from Jerusalem, because it did raise quite a stir and attention in international media, and that is often what happens. People always want to categorize and say, well, who are these people? And then you get associated with this or that or whatever, and they want to put you in a box. And I think this is actually one of the lessons we learned from the Sanremo live broadcast, that, as you know, I was in touch with many of the leading journalists. And then, Gregory, we had this discussion and we said, well, why don't we do a webinar where we can define who we are, when we can have this conversation, and people can decide for themselves, is this relevant, is this kosher, or what are they actually saying? So I think, there are many things that we have learned, and I hope that coming out and gradually, in a more normal situation, that we will be able to take out the best lessons from this crisis. maybe I should just mention, because that's also some of the questions that that has been sent in. People are asking then about the International Coalition for Israel and how it relates to European Coalition for Israel, and you being the co-founder of Forum for Cultural Diplomacy. This is also an evolution of the work that we've done. You know, 17 years ago, we started very simply with saying, listen, we want to stand up and raise a voice on behalf of Israel. But then over the years, I think if we are adaptable, the methodology sometimes changes, and we try to see what makes sense, what produces results, you know, what is a no-go. And
so we won't be talking about the European Coalition for Israel anymore. It will only be the International Coalition, or
yeah, that is a direct question, and I think when we had the Zoom, we didn't perhaps answer it eloquently enough. I would make the comparison: those who fly a lot. You know, if you fly Finnair and British Airways, you're part of one world,
yeah,
which is an umbrella. But most people are not so concerned about what is one world, but it's more, you know, the national carrier. So I think in the same way, as of now, that International Coalition for Israel is this one world, or Star Alliance, if you wish, where you have the operational bodies like ECI, which I think always will be the primary agent, but also we're in the process of establishing ICI USA. The forum will have more of a profile in the future, and we are also active in Africa, with again with a little bit of a different approach, and I think that may be a theme for an upcoming webinar as well. So ECI, as for now, is the main actor in all of this. But say for Andreas Kelling, when he is in Africa, it doesn't make sense for him to say that he's sent out from the Europeans. It's much more logic that he's sent out from an international coalition, in this respect, based in Geneva, which is very close to your heart.
Well, that's where I come from. Yes. So do you want to continue to talk about a little bit of the future of ECI, or shall we switch to the questions that were sent?
Yeah, maybe obviously to say that this is hopefully the first of many webinars to come, and we may even now reveal that next week we're planning on doing a similar webinar where the theme would more be the work at the United Nations and the role of cultural diplomacy. Hopefully within a near future also to involve more people. We're going to keep that a little bit a secret, who we are planning to involve in these webinars, but to give us this opportunity, which I think is a beautiful expression of, yes, you know, when open source, that, you know, we can produce this without going into a studio and, you know, spending lots of money. Yeah, so let's sort of wrap it up on the.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out, I mean, as you've mentioned several times already today, that it has this corona crisis, this COVID-19 crisis has opened up opportunities for us in a way. It's true that Sanremo would not have been the same. I don't think we would have reached out so much, I mean, to so many government leaders if it had not been for this situation. And now today, those webinars, I think it's important to see what we can do through them. You know, not having just a conversation, you know, just between the two of us, but also to see who, you know, the world leaders that can be interviewed and on certain issues concerning anti-Semitism, but also on on the question of Sanremo, of the relevance of Sanremo. So I think it's a powerful.
Gregory, do you want to just mention briefly? We're issuing a monthly report later today, and it will be in the monthly report. But maybe you want to say something about the virtual concert, which was also an expression of.
Yes, well, I think I won't say too much today because we're planning a webinar on the work at the UN. So I think I'll reserve most of it for that. But it was an idea that came through discussions with the former Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Jan Eliasson, of mixing classical music and readings of literary texts. And I thought it was fantastic when he did it 5 years ago. There was something quite quite unique in you know, many times as Katharina von Schnorbein, who was one of the persons who was one of the panelists who was reading the text when we did that event. She said many times the music is used as something a bit on the side, that it doesn't have its place in politics. It usually doesn't have any place, but even in diplomacy, usually there's no real place given to music. And surprisingly, to text, there's not much place given to profound text, to literature. Most of the ambassadors, of the diplomats, come from, you know, humanities, but literature doesn't have much of a place. So we try to see how we can bring the two together and give a message of hope in this this time of turmoil, to see how we can give a message of hope connected to Passover. So I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but we'll say more, I think, next week.
In one way, it connects back to the Book of Esther, of course, because the question was, you know, who are these Jewish people? What have they, what they have contributed with to humanity? And that's, of course, the theme for the next webinar. Yes. But I think it's good to find these different layers, going back to the Book of Esther, going back to Purim, going back to the early days of ECI, and see that there are so many expressions that we can still explore.
Yeah, perhaps before we go to questions, we didn't plan this. Perhaps you're going to be surprised, but I'm thinking, should we just talked about literature and Esther, etc. Could I read just a few lines of Racine, which it's quite beautiful, of what he says concerning the but it's. I know I didn't warn you of that, but I'm just thinking perhaps it would be interesting to you. It's the king in the Racine's piece. It's the king speaking to Mardoché, to Mordechai. He says, "Mortel, chéri du ciel, mon salut et ma joie. Au conseil des méchants, ton roi n'est plus en proie. Mes yeux sont dessillés, le crime est confondu. Viens briller près de moi dans le rang qui t'est dû. Je te donne d'Aman les biens et la puissance, possède justement son injuste opulence. Je romps le joug funeste où les Juifs sont soumis, je leur livre le sang de tous leurs ennemis. À l'égal des Persans, je veux qu'on les honore et que tout tremble au nom du Dieu qu'Esther adore. Rebâtissez son temple et peuplez vos cités, que vos heureux enfants, dans leur solennité, consacrent de ce jour le triomphe et la gloire, et qu'à jamais mon nom vive dans leur mémoire." I would love to see that happen in the current situation. If there could be a king having the same attitude, saying the same things, overturning things, telling the Jews, okay, you've provided, you've given us so much. Now we want to overturn all the decisions.
We believe that, Gregory, don't we?
Yeah.
So, sorry, I forgot to commend you on your little pin. Tell us what it is.
Yes, well, this comes from the Wallenberg family. it was to you have one also, I know. It was to thank us for what we were trying to do, and let's hope we will be able to do more on this, to try to help them to to find what happened to Raoul Wallenberg. The UN is actually still working today on trying to find what happened to Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General. But it's still an open question also what happened really to Raoul Wallenberg.
It's a good reminder. We shouldn't lose that, and we should continue to pursue it.
So perhaps before, because we want to be conscious of time, I think it would be the right moment to switch to the questions that we have received. So let me get to those. So we received quite a number of questions, but I will just take some of them and ask you those questions. So how do you see, how will things go on after this COVID-19 pause concerning the Sanremo Centennial?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we commented on that earlier in the program, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that it was not a failure, it was not a disappointment. What happened, the fact that some 80 government leaders were given an explanation about the Sanremo resolution, what it is, and actually had to read it and come to a conclusion, is a huge achievement. I think one of the greatest achievements we ever had. Mm-hmm. So that is important to point out, but we are still working on having a physical conference in Sanremo. We are looking at the last weekend of October, which would lead into the Balfour anniversary. But we will keep you informed about that, and we believe the Sanremo anniversary, of course, centenary, I should say, is 1 year. It wasn't just one day. Yeah. So we hope to have many opportunities to come back to the message, but also to be into Sanremo in solidarity, I would say, with the city of Sanremo, with the state of Italy. And we have to recognize again the very nice and warm letter from the Prime Minister of Italy. So we have a commitment to Italy, and I have said myself that I promise to buy at least 2 new Italian suits in solidarity with the Italian economy. So
good for you. One other question is how would you say the pause may affect the way diplomacy and politics operate in the future?
Well, I'm not sure that, well, I think the obvious technical answer is that I think, say, within the EU, that they realized a lot more can be done this way that we are doing today. When you look at the, you know, I'm traveling often from Helsinki to Brussels, and you see the number of officials that are traveling over the day to Brussels just to attend a meeting for a few hours. I don't think that's the most effective way to work today. So I actually hope that, you know, institutions like the European Union could adapt much more of their work, and they would, you know, save time and you know, save the environment for that matter by just doing things a little bit more effectively. That's a technicality. So I think, of course, everything we do is based on human relations. It's you know, building a relationship, becoming friends, and based on that, be able to convey something. So, of course, you don't get to know someone just over a Zoom call. And I think for us, the fact that it worked as well as it did was based on these 17 years of investing in personal relationships. But I'm very eager to meet people face to face again.
So am I, yes. There were a number of questions about what I would call the elephant in the room, which is the question of the annexation of Judea and Samaria. What is ECI's position on this?
Yeah, I would, as a good politician or diplomat, I would relate back to our monthly report of, of last month, where we made some general comments. This is obviously a theme for a webinar of its own to go into the details. But what we have pointed out is not only the legal facts, for example, that you cannot annex something that you already that already legally is part of your territory. So I think there's a misconception already with terminology. I think on a practical level that Israel extending civil law to these 30% of Judea and Samaria is something from which I understand that will make even the Palestinians living in those areas more secure and have a better legal protection, because you go from a military law to civil law.
Mm-hmm.
What is perhaps
what would you say to the I'm not sure if you realize that just while we're talking right now, the UN Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People are meeting right now on the question of this annexation. What would you tell them?
I would give a short history lesson, and I would ask them, why are the Jews called Jews? And I said the obvious answer to that question is, well, the Jews come from Judea. And I mean, Gregory, you know that better than me, the semantics around that and the history. And to make a point of saying that there can be no Jews in Judea and Samaria, and to dismiss 3,000 years of history, but also modern international law, which reaffirms this historical connection. And then taking into consideration that the area, the so-called West Bank, never belonged to any other sovereign state. For me, that's a very strong claim for Israel to Judea and Samaria. You can then continue the discussion and say, well, strategically speaking, is this the right time? And I think, people may have different opinions tactically as to, whether this makes sense or not. But as we said in the monthly report, there's a very strong case for Jewish sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. We always say that, we hope that this would be part of a peace process, that this is, we don't think unilateralism is always the best answer. So, we'd like to see this included and discussed in a peace process. The problem today is that, they have never even started this discussion, even on to say, well, what is the West Bank? How did it? What's the history of the last 70 years? So I think we as an organization, we're not a law firm, but still we can open up a discussion as to what is a logical reasoning. And I think what I mentioned, just a few points that I mentioned here, is something that clearly needs to be part of that discussion.
Yes. We're gonna run out of time in a few minutes, but I saw one question that I found a bit provocative, but I think it's interesting. Is why yet another organization for Israel?
Yeah, again, I think hopefully I did hint at some of the answers earlier in the program, where when I took the initiative more than 17 years ago, obviously there were lots of good pro-Israel organizations around. What I, as a secular, if you want to call that, use that phrase, journalist based in Brussels, realized was that most of these voices were marginalized. So it doesn't matter how right you are biblically, politically, legally, if you are not part of the discussion. So I think that that would be my answer to your question, and say that for us, it has been as important to be in the room, in the discussion, being recognized, than to entertain an audience that already has all the answers. We need to challenge ourselves and say, well, how can we become relevant in the larger debate, in the public debate? And I think that this has been our ambition from the very start. And to the extent that we have succeeded, that's not for me to decide, but this has been a clear ambition.
I mean, there were quite a number of other questions, but I think we're running out of time. So I think we'll stop here with the questions. So thank you, Tomas. Thank you for this discussion.
Thank you, Gregory. It's as we said a few weeks ago when we decided we were going to do this, we said, well, we're doing this all the time, be it on WhatsApp or when we meet in Brussels or New York, and we sit down and we talk. And so in some way, this has not been very different, other than, I guess there are still a few people listening in, but it has given us the opportunity to have our own voice. Next week, we should then say that same Thursday, we will have a webinar where we will focus on the work at the UN and cultural diplomacy, and I will ask mostly and lead the discussion with Gregory to hear more about that work. It's been interesting, at least for me, and I hope, and I'm sure for Gregory as well, and we hope that those who have joined us have also been inspired and will join us again next week. So until then, we wish you all the best, and soon to be Shabbat Shalom.
להתראות.
For us, the Jewish people, this is no more than a piece of paper, and we shall treat it as such. Thank you, Mr. President.